The night he humiliated me in front of our children. The whole restaurant went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in my glass. My daughter was staring at the table, blinking hard like she was trying not to cry. My son had gone pale. And my husband, Grant, sat across from us with that same polished smile he always wore when he wanted to hurt me without looking like the villain. He leaned back in the booth, spread his hands, and said, loud enough for every person near us to hear, "Let's be honest here. Elise has been living off my hard work for years. She should be grateful she's still invited to these things." I thought maybe I had misheard him. I even smiled a little, like I could smooth the moment over if I played it off. But then he kept going. "She likes to pretend she's holding this family together," he said, glancing at our kids like they were witnesses in a case he had already won. "But if I stopped covering everything, this whole life would fall apart in a week." My son whispered, "Dad." Grant held up one finger, still smiling. "No, I want them to hear this. Your mother has had a very easy life, a comfortable life, paid for by me." The words hit me so hard I felt them physically, like a hand closing around my chest. I looked at our children, then at the people in the restaurant pretending not to stare, and I realized something I had been trying not to admit for years. He wasn't angry. He was enjoying it. That was the moment my life split clean in two. The woman I had been before that night, the one who kept the peace, who explained away his moods, who told herself the children needed a father more than they needed a perfect marriage, that woman died right there between the breadbasket and the candlelight. I slowly folded my napkin, stood up, and took my purse from the back of the chair. Grant frowned. "Sit down, Elise. Don't make a scene." I looked at him, then at our children, and said quietly, "No scene, just a decision." My daughter finally lifted her head. "Mom?" I kissed the top of her hand as I passed her, then my son's shoulder. My voice was shaking, but I kept it steady enough to say, "I love you both. I'll call you tomorrow." Grant laughed under his breath like I was being dramatic. "You'll be back by morning." I stopped at the end of the booth and turned to him one last time. "No, Grant. You won't get the chance to talk to me like that again." Then I walked out without looking back. I did not know where I was going. I did not have a grand plan. I only knew that if I stayed 1 second longer, I would break in front of our children, and I refused to give him that victory. The air outside was cold enough to sting my cheeks. I stood on the sidewalk with my car keys in my hand and realized I was trembling so hard I could barely unlock the door. For a few minutes, I just sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring at the restaurant windows glowing behind me. Inside, my children were still at the table with the man who had just tried to turn me into a joke. I remember gripping the steering wheel and whispering, "Not anymore." That was the night I left. Not just the restaurant. Not just him. The whole lie. If you had seen me 2 weeks earlier, you would have thought my life was ordinary, in the way people like to call a life ordinary when they have never had to survive inside it. We lived in a big house in a nice suburb outside Columbus, the kind of place where the lawns all looked trimmed by the same hand and the mailboxes stood in neat little rows. Grant had built his reputation over the years as a business owner, the kind of man who shook hands hard and smiled wide and knew how to sound generous in front of other people. To the outside world, we were the family everyone quietly envied. We had 2 children, Ava, 15, sharp-eyed and too perceptive for her own peace of mind, and Noah, 11, still young enough to believe a family could be repaired with enough patience and one honest conversation. Grant could be charming with them when he wanted to be. He coached Noah's baseball team. He bought Ava expensive sketchbooks and acted proud when she won art awards. He posted smiling family photos online like proof of a life well managed. But at home, when the door closed and the public version of him slipped off, there was a different man waiting. He did not yell all the time. That would have been simpler. Instead, he cut. He cut with remarks that sounded almost reasonable if you heard them from far enough away. He cut with sighs, with eye rolls, with compliments that were really insults dressed in nice clothes. He cut with money, because money was the language he trusted most. If he wanted obedience, he used the credit card. If he wanted silence, he used the mortgage. If he wanted to remind me that I was trapped, he called it our lifestyle. I had once been a graphic designer before our second child was born. I had real clients, real deadlines, real pride in work that had my name on it. Grant told me it made more sense for me to stay home when Ava was born because his business was expanding and somebody needed to be stable. I agreed because I loved my kids, because the math seemed practical, because I trusted the man I married. By the time Noah started kindergarten, I had stopped asking for freelance work. By the time Ava was in middle school, I had stopped introducing myself as a designer at all. I was the mother who ran the house. I was the wife who made things smooth. I was the woman who made sure there was always soup in the fridge, bills paid on time, clean uniforms folded in drawers, and birthday gifts wrapped before midnight. And Grant, whenever he wanted to remind me of my place, would smile and say, "You should thank me. You'd be lost without me." I used to laugh along. That night at the restaurant, I didn't laugh. I drove to a motel on the edge of town because I couldn't bear to go home, not yet. I checked in under my own name for the first time in years and sat on a bed that smelled like bleach and old carpet. Then I took out my phone and saw 12 missed calls from Grant, 5 from Ava, and 1 text from Noah that simply said, "Mom, are you okay?" I stared at that message until my eyes burned. I did not reply to Grant. I could not. I replied to Noah first. "I'm safe. I love you. I'll explain tomorrow." Then I texted Ava the same thing, because she was the one who would ask the hardest questions. After that, I turned my phone face down on the thin motel blanket and sat in silence for a long time. At 11:47 that night, my phone rang again. I almost ignored it, but the number was unfamiliar, and something in me decided to answer. "Mrs. Whitaker?" a calm woman's voice said. "This is Dana Lewis from Bell and Rowan. I'm the attorney for your late aunt, Vivian Mercer. I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks regarding the final filing on her estate. I know it's late, but this became urgent." My heart gave a strange little jump. Aunt Vivian had died 3 months earlier, and the whole family had been in pieces over it. She had been my mother's younger sister, the one person in my life who always spoke plainly. She wore the same silver watch every day, kept peppermint candies in her bag, and knew exactly when someone was pretending to be fine. She had no children of her own, and in the last years of her life she had leaned on me more than anyone else. I had taken her to appointments. I had sat with her on bad days. I had brought her ginger tea and listened to stories she had never told anyone else. Grant had always acted bored by her, which only made her like me more. "I'm sorry," I said into the phone. I didn't realize there was anything left to handle. "There is," Dana said, "and I think you need to come in as soon as possible. Your aunt left very specific instructions that this be delivered to you in person." I closed my eyes for a second. What kind of instructions? "A trust, a property transfer, and a sealed letter." I had no idea then that those 3 things would change everything. The next morning, I sat in Dana Lewis's office with my hands folded so tightly in my lap my knuckles hurt. She was in her 50s, polished and kind in a way that suggested she had seen every kind of family drama money could create. She slid a thick folder across the desk and watched me carefully as I opened it. My aunt had left me her lake house in Vermont, the one she had owned for decades and only visited in the summer. I had loved that place as a girl. It was old and slightly crooked and smelled like cedar and rain. But that wasn't all. She had also left me sole control over a trust funded by the sale of a small commercial building in Hartford, plus a handwritten letter explaining that she had deliberately held the transfer until after her death so no one could pressure me into giving it away. I stared at the pages, not understanding. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Dana gave me a small, careful smile. "Your aunt said you would say that?" I looked up. Why would she leave all this to me? She opened the sealed letter and handed it to me only after I nodded. "Read her words. That will answer more than I can." The letter was in Aunt Vivian's familiar, slanted handwriting. "Elise," she wrote, "I have watched you make yourself small for the comfort of others. I have watched you apologize for being hurt. I have watched you carry a family on your shoulders while being told it was not enough. I am leaving this to you because it is yours. And because I want you to remember that being kind is not the same thing as being weak. Use this to build a life you do not have to whisper inside of." I had to stop reading because my throat closed. There was one more page in the folder. On it was a note from the attorney. Your aunt requested that I advise you not to discuss this inheritance with your husband until you review the attached financial records from the property transfer. She believed they may be relevant to your household situation. My pulse changed. Relevant? I looked at the records, and then my skin went cold. Grant had been trying for months to convince me to sign a few simple forms related to refinancing our house and tidying up some shared investments. He had told me it was just administrative work. He had told me not to worry because it was all under control. I had nearly signed those papers 3 times. But the records from my aunt's trust showed something else entirely. They showed that a company Grant had formed, 6 months earlier, had already been circling the Hartford building before my aunt's death. They showed he had made calls asking about the value of the property. They showed he had quietly told a broker that his wife would eventually have access to the inherited funds once the estate settled. My mouth went dry. How did he know about this? I asked. Dana's expression hardened just a little. That's what I'm concerned about. I sat there with the papers in my lap and felt the last bit of trust I had in my marriage crack open. Grant had been paying attention to my aunt's estate for reasons he had never shared with me. He had been asking questions, watching, waiting, and suddenly every strange comment from the last year made a new kind of sense. Why had he been so eager for me to handle my aunt's mail? Why had he insisted he should drive me to the hospital when she was dying? Why had he gotten irritated every time I said I needed to speak to the attorney alone? Because he had not just been careless. He had been planning. I drove home with the folder hidden under my jacket like contraband. I walked through my own front door and found Grant at the kitchen island in a pressed shirt, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. He looked up and smiled. The smile that used to make me feel safe. "You're back," he said. I set my keys down slowly. "We need to talk." He looked at my face and immediately calculated something. I knew that look. It meant he was choosing his version of the truth. "About last night?" he asked. "About your lies." He gave a little laugh, as if I had said something amusing. "Elise, not here. Why were you asking about my aunt's property?" The smile disappeared. That was all the answer I needed. He leaned both palms on the counter. "Where did you hear that?" "So it's true." He said nothing, and the silence between us grew thick and ugly. I placed the folder on the counter. "Dana Lewis called me. I saw the records." Grant's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not anger, not guilt. Calculation. Fast, cold calculation. Then he straightened, adjusted his cuff, and said, "Fine. Since you want honesty, I'll give you honesty. I was trying to help us." "Help us?" My voice rose despite myself. "You were tracking my inheritance. It's not like that." "What then?" He exhaled through his nose as if I were being difficult on purpose. "Your aunt's properties could have made a real difference. We have bills. We have obligations. I'm trying to keep this family secure." I stared at him. "By going around me? By asking brokers about my money before I even saw the papers?" He shrugged. "You panic too easily." That one sentence, simple and dismissive, did more damage than screaming ever could have done. I remember gripping the edge of the counter and saying, "Did you tell them I'd have access to it?" I said there were ways to structure things efficiently. "Did you?" Grant's eyes held mine for half a second, and in that half second I saw the answer. "Yes," he said. The word was so soft it almost disappeared. Then he added, "You're making this bigger than it is." I actually laughed, and it sounded broken even to me. "Bigger than it is?" "You were trying to manage my inheritance behind my back, because someone had to think ahead." I took a breath, then another. "You mean control ahead?" That made him angry. I could tell because he stopped pretending to be patient. "You think you're the only one who sacrificed here?" he snapped. "I worked. I built everything. I carried this family. And lately all you do is sit around acting like some tragic hero in your own house." I looked at him, stunned. He pointed toward the hallway where our children were upstairs. "Do you know what they see? They see a mother who contributes nothing and still expects gratitude." My hands started shaking. "Don't you dare talk about me like that." "Why not?" "It's true. That was the beginning of the end. Not the restaurant. This." The moment he decided to stop pretending the marriage was a marriage and start treating me like an obstacle, I should have left then. but I didn't. I did what women do when they have spent years trying to keep a family from falling apart. I tried to reason with him. I told him the children were upstairs. I told him we could talk later. I told him we needed to be careful. He saw my caution as weakness. Over the next week, he became bolder, almost reckless. He left documents on the kitchen counter where I could find them. He made sarcastic comments in front of the kids about budgeting my habits. He asked me twice to sign papers without letting me read the fine print. He started saying things like, "You'd be lost without me," in a tone that made my stomach twist. Ava noticed first. "Mom," she said one morning while we were alone in the laundry room, "is Dad being weird to you?" I folded a towel and kept my face neutral. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged, but her eyes were serious. "Because he keeps saying things that make you look stupid, and you always smile like it's fine." My throat tightened. "It's complicated." "No," she said quietly. "It's not. It's mean." I looked at my daughter then, really looked at her, and saw how much she had already learned about men from watching The Wrong One. Noah was younger, but even he started asking small questions that told me he understood more than I hoped. One night, after Grant had left the room annoyed because I refused to sign a refinance packet, for now, Noah climbed into the kitchen chair beside me and said, "Did you do something wrong?" I almost cried right there. "No, baby," I said. "I didn't." He studied me. "Then why does Dad talk like you did?" I had no answer that would not damage him, so I said the only honest thing I could manage. "Sometimes people say cruel things when they want to feel powerful." He absorbed that in silence, then asked, "Do you want to leave?" That question broke my heart. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Not because of you." It was after that conversation that I knew I could not keep pretending. The children were already feeling the damage. If I stayed silent much longer, they would learn to accept it as normal. 2 days later, Grant threw a dinner for his business partners and a few of his family members at the same restaurant, where he later humiliated me. He told me to dress nicely because it was important to look united. He handed me the list of people attending and said, "Try not to overshare tonight. Just smile and stay warm." I knew then, with a clarity so sharp it almost felt calm, that he had set the stage for something. He was planning to impress people, or corner me, or both. I should have refused to go. Instead, I went, because part of me still believed he would not be cruel in front of the children. That was my mistake. The restaurant was full of polished wood and soft lights, the kind of place where every table looked expensive. Grant was already in fine form when we arrived, charming the room with stories about expansion, growth, vision, and discipline. He kept putting a hand at the small of my back in public like he was an affectionate husband. In private, under the table, he squeezed my wrist each time I tried to speak. Halfway through dinner, after a round of speeches from his brother and one of his clients, Grant stood and tapped a glass. "I just want to say something about the people who've supported me," he began. His mother smiled proudly. His business partner leaned in. Ava and Noah looked up, both of them excited because they thought he was about to say something nice about the family. I should have seen it coming. Grant looked directly at me and said, "Success requires sacrifice. Some people understand that. Some people coast on it." The room shifted. Not everyone caught the edge in his voice, but I did. My children did. He continued, "My wife has enjoyed a very comfortable life for a long time, and I think it's important for people to recognize when they are standing near success and when they are actually creating it." I went still. Then he added, "I'm proud that I've built something stable enough to support everyone, even when not everyone pulls their weight." Ava's face changed first, then Noah's. I looked at Grant and realized he had planned this. This was not an offhand insult. It was a performance. He wanted to diminish me in front of people whose opinion he valued. He wanted the children to see him as the source of everything and me as the dependent one. He wanted me smaller. I took a breath and tried to save it, because that is who I had been for years. "Grant, that's enough." He smiled. "Why? The truth is uncomfortable?" That made a few people at the table go silent. I heard my own voice, calm and distant, say, "You should stop talking." But he had tasted blood now. He was too far into whatever private rage had been building in him. He leaned forward. "You know what the difference is between us, Elise. I understand responsibility. You understand resentment. My son whispered, Dad, please. Grant didn't even look at him. No, Noah. You need to learn this. Not everything is someone else's fault. It was the way he said it, like he was teaching, that made me realize how deep the contempt went. He was not just angry. He genuinely believed he was superior. He believed the children should internalize his version of events. He believed if he said it confidently enough, it would become true. Then he said the words that ended everything. You should be grateful I've allowed this family to stay afloat. If I walked away, Elise would have nothing. That was when I stood up. The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. Every face blurred except my children's. I'm done, I said. Grant laughed. Sit down. No. He looked embarrassed now, which was almost satisfying. But not enough. You're making a scene. No, I said, my voice suddenly very clear. You did that. You did it in front of our children. Ava's eyes filled with tears. Grant's jaw tightened. Not here. I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, You want the truth? I have spent years carrying this family while you practiced sounding like a king. I have protected you, covered for you, and absorbed every insult you could think of. Not because I was weak, because I thought my children deserved peace. The table was absolutely silent. I pointed at the children, my voice shaking now with the force of all the things I had swallowed. They deserve better than this. Grant hissed, Elise, stop. I took my purse. No. His face changed then, and I recognized it with horrible clarity. He was not ashamed. He was furious that I had stopped obeying. I looked at Ava and Noah. I love you. I'm sorry you had to hear this. Then I walked out. And that is how I ended up in the motel room with the dim lamp and the buzzing phone and the folder from my aunt. For the first time in years, the silence around me was mine. It was terrifying. It was also clean. The next morning, I called Dana Lewis back and asked one question. Can my aunt's records help me protect myself? There was a pause, and then she said, Possibly, more than you know. So I met her again that afternoon. And this time she showed me something I had not understood from the first folder. My aunt had not only left me property, she had also left behind a statement to be opened if I ever found myself in a financial conflict involving Grant Whitaker or any business entity connected to him. My stomach went cold. You knew about him? I asked. Dana folded her hands. Your aunt suspected he was using your name in ways you didn't fully approve. And you waited? She didn't want to interfere unless she had to. But she was a careful woman. She kept copies of everything. Then she slid over a flash drive and a set of printed emails. My hands were trembling before I even touched them. The emails were between Grant and a man named Victor Dane, a broker Grant had used twice before without telling me. In those emails, Grant discussed refinancing our house, leveraging my name on a separate property line, and stabilizing the household account after the transfer. One email referred to me as likely compliant once the pressure is removed. I read that line 3 times. Likely compliant. Pressure. Removed. My face went numb. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew enough to be frightened. Dana looked grim. It means he was preparing to move money around before you had time to question it. I am not your lawyer unless you choose to retain me, but based on what I've seen, I would tell you not to sign anything and not to confront him alone. I stared at the papers. There was more. Much more. Over the next 2 days, with Dana's help, I learned that Grant had already created a side account linked to one of our old business tax filings. He had been shifting funds through it in tiny amounts for over a year. Nothing huge at once. Nothing obvious. Just enough to avoid attention until the totals became impossible to ignore. He had not only been belittling me, he had been using me. Not metaphorically. Literally. My name, my credit history, our shared property, even the inheritance from my aunt he had quietly tried to position himself to access. The rage I felt was different from the one at the restaurant. At the restaurant I had been wounded. Now I was awake. I made copies of everything. I opened a bank account in my own name. I took the children's passports from the fireproof box and put them somewhere Grant would not look. And then I did the hardest thing of all. I told Ava and Noah the truth in words they could understand without crushing them. We sat in the living room, the three of us, and I said, "Your father has been dishonest with me. He has also been cruel. I am leaving the house for a while so I can handle things safely. This is not your fault. You are not losing me. I will always be your mother." Ava started crying immediately. Noah looked scared. Is Dad going to be mad? Yes, I said, because I would not lie. Probably. Ava wiped her face. Are you coming back? I took her hand. Not to the same life. That was the closest I got to saying I was done. Grant came home that evening to find my bags packed in the foyer and the children sitting stiffly on the couch. He took one look at the luggage and his whole body went rigid. What is this? He asked. I stood by the front door with my coat in my hand. I'm leaving. His eyes flashed to the children, then back to me. You're being dramatic again. Maybe. I lifted the folder. But this time I have receipts. The color drained from his face so fast I almost pitied him. Almost. He set his keys down carefully. We need to talk privately. No. He took one step toward me. Elise, I held up my hand. You do not get to use my name like that. You do not get to humiliate me in front of our children and then act like I'm unstable for reacting. He stared at the folder, then at me. Where did you get that? My aunt left it for me. Something ugly flashed through his expression. That old woman meddled. I think that was the first time Ava gasped out loud. My son stood up from the couch. Don't talk about Grandma Vivian like that. Grant snapped. Sit down. Noah froze. I realized with sudden, awful certainty that my children had been living under the same fear I had been trying to normalize for them. And I knew then I could never go back to pretending. I said, I'm meeting with an attorney. You can talk to Dana Lewis if you want, but do not contact me directly, except about the kids. His face changed. You're choosing lawyers over your family? I laughed. And this time the sound was hard. No, Grant. I'm choosing my family over your version of it. He looked stunned, as if he had genuinely never considered the possibility that I might stop obeying. Then he said, very softly, You won't get very far. That was his mistake, because I already had. The legal process was not glamorous. It was paperwork, hearings, bank statements, statements from the broker, tax records, and one very uncomfortable forensic review that made Grant's accounting methods look far less innocent than he had claimed. Dana moved with calm precision, and each new discovery stripped away another layer of the life I had been living blind. It turned out Grant had taken a second line of credit against our house without telling me. The signature on one of the forms was mine, but I had not signed it. A comparison showed it had been traced. It also turned out that his business was in more trouble than he had admitted. And my aunt's property transfer had become the thing he was hoping to use as a financial bridge. He had not just been arrogant. He had been cornered, and people who feel cornered often become ugly. He started sending messages. First, angry ones, then pleading ones, then long, rambling ones about stress, pressure, and how good men make mistakes. He told me I was overreacting. He told me he had never meant to hurt me. He told me I was forcing him into a difficult position by not being forgiving. I saved every message. Then he started calling the children. Ava stopped answering first. Noah answered once, listened, and handed the phone to me without saying a word. Grant was crying by then, or trying to sound like he was. He told me he was sorry. He told me he would go to counseling. He told me the family could still be saved. I asked him one question. Did you mean what you said at dinner? Silence. That silence told me more than any apology could. When the court date came, I wore a navy dress my aunt had once told me made me look decisive. I remember standing in the hallway with Dana beside me, watching Grant arrive in his best suit, hair perfect, jaw clenched, as if he were attending a gala instead of the collapse of his own making. He looked at me like he still expected fear. I did not give him any. Inside the hearing, the evidence was laid out one piece at a time. The forged signature, the hidden debt, the correspondence with the broker, the attempted access to my inheritance, the side account, the financial manipulation. Grant's attorney tried to soften it, to frame it as confusion, administrative messiness, stress under pressure. But the paper trail was merciless. Paper does not care how handsome a liar looks. When it was my turn to speak, The room went still. I looked not at Grant, but at the judge, and said, I spent years believing that keeping my family intact meant absorbing disrespect quietly. I was wrong. My children watched me being diminished. My husband used my silence as permission. I am here because I will not let my children inherit that lesson. My voice did not shake. Grant was staring at me like he had never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. The judge ordered the financial records reviewed in full, froze the contested accounts, and appointed a temporary administrator for the business until the investigation was complete. The house was tied up until the debt issues were resolved, but the court protected my interest and the children's. My aunt's trust remained entirely under my control, just as she intended. Grant lost the thing he cared about most: control. The fallout was swift and miserable for him. His business partners backed away the minute the records became public. His reputation in the neighborhood shifted from polished and admirable to cautious and embarrassed. The man who had liked to announce his own importance suddenly found fewer people answering his calls. He tried to act wounded, but the room had stopped applauding him. A week later, he showed up at the rental townhouse I had taken with a bouquet of grocery store flowers and the kind of face men make when they think regret is a performance. I stepped outside but did not let him in. He said, I made mistakes. I crossed my arms. You made choices. I didn't think you would leave. That was the problem. He looked at me for a long moment and then glanced past my shoulder toward the door, probably hoping the children would appear and soften me. They did not. Ava was with her aunt. Noah was at practice. Grant swallowed. Tell me what you want. I almost laughed. What I wanted? I wanted to rewind a decade and warn the younger version of me that a calm voice is not the same thing as a kind heart. I wanted my children not to have heard him talk to me like I was disposable. I wanted my aunt alive long enough to see this. I wanted to never again feel my own worth measured by a man who needed to diminish me in order to stand tall. But none of that was possible. So I said, I want peace, and I want my children to know what respect looks like. He winced as if I had struck him. We can still fix this. No, I said. You can fix yourself. That is not the same thing. He stood there with the flowers drooping in his hand, and for the first time in our marriage he had nothing clever to say. No joke, no correction, no moral lecture, just silence. I left him on the porch and went back inside. Months passed. The children and I found a rhythm in the new life, though new doesn't really capture how strange it feels to breathe after years of holding it in. Ava started painting again in a way that made her seem brighter. Noah stopped flinching every time a door closed too hard. I took small design jobs from home, then bigger ones. I used a portion of Aunt Vivian's trust to renovate the lake house in Vermont into a summer rental and creative retreat, the kind of place my aunt would have liked, because it stayed busy and useful without trying too hard to impress anyone. That first summer, I brought the kids there for 2 weeks. The lake was still and silver in the mornings. The porch creaked in the exact same way it had when I was a child. At night, we sat outside with blankets around our shoulders and watched the water darken under the sky. One evening, Ava asked, Do you miss him? I considered the question honestly. I miss what I hoped he was. She nodded like that made sense. Noah threw a pebble into the water. He keeps saying sorry. I know, I said. Should he come here? I looked at the lake and then at both of my children. Not unless he learns how to be a better man first. Ava gave a short laugh. That might take a while. Yes, I said, smiling a little. It might. There was no dramatic apology from Grant that fixed everything. No movie-ending speech. Real life is less generous than that. He sent letters for a while, then fewer. He tried to improve his image, then got tired. A man who has spent years believing he is entitled to admiration does not always know how to live without it. Eventually, he settled into the consequences with the same stubborn pride that had caused them. He sees the children on scheduled days now. Sometimes the visits are awkward. Sometimes they are better. The difference is that he no longer gets to decide the terms. He no longer gets to perform a version of our life where I am the obedient background character and he is the center. That power is gone. And as for me, I do not spend much time thinking about revenge, though I understand now why people are tempted by it. Revenge is immediate. Justice is slower. But justice lasts longer. And peace lasts longer than that. A year after I walked out of that restaurant, I stood on the porch of the lake house with a cup of coffee in my hand and watched my children run down to the dock laughing in the morning light. Ava had paint on her fingers. Noah had already found a way to get water on his shirt. The house behind me was full of warm wood, new curtains, and a life I had rebuilt with my own hands. My phone rang. It was Dana Lewis. "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "The final financial review is complete. The remaining irregularities have been assigned back to him. Your position is fully protected." I closed my eyes for a second and let the words settle. Protected. No one had ever used that word for me in the years I was married to Grant. Not once. When I opened my eyes, my children were calling me to come look at something by the water. I set my coffee down and walked toward them, feeling the morning sun on my face. Grant had once told me I would be nothing without him. He was wrong. I was something before him. I became stronger after him. And in the end, the most painful thing he ever did to me was also the thing that saved me. Because when he humiliated me in front of our children, he finally revealed exactly who he was. Once I saw him clearly, I could never love the lie again. I did not leave with a grand speech. I did not leave with my head held high on purpose. I left because staying would have taught my children that love should hurt like that. I walked out without looking back. And that choice, the one he mocked in the beginning, became the first honest step of my life. In the years since, I have learned something I wish I had known sooner. A person can survive betrayal. A person can survive being underestimated. A person can survive the moment their whole world cracks open in public. What they cannot survive, not for long, is pretending they deserve it. So I stopped pretending, and by the time Grant realized he had lost control, I had already gained something he could never take from me again: my peace.